and the fellow colleagues. I am Avni Bharadwaj. Today, my group and I are here to present the concept of formal and informal institutions with regards to the laws and regulations of global economy, along with a case discussion on the economic conditions of Cuba. My group members will be discussing on the following topics. Busari will be discussing on farming in Cuba, state-owned enterprise, and the capitalism in Cuba. Dhulki will be discussing the Cuba's economic model and the imperative role of communism in Cuba. Yaw will be discussing the weather conditions effect on the foreign direct investment in Cuba and how US regulations is impacting the economy of Cuba. Thank you. Is to reduce uncertainty. It can be in the form of political, economic, or monetary. Political uncertainty, such as terrorist attacks and ethnic riots. Economic uncertainty can be in the failure to carry out contractual obligations. It may result in economic losses. Uncertainties surrounding economic transactions can lead to transaction cost, which are associated with these transactions. One of the most important transaction cost is opportunism. It is defined as the self-interest seeking with guile. Some of the examples which include are misleading, cheating other parties in the transactions that will increase the transaction cost. An attempt to reduce such transaction cost, institutions, frameworks increase certain by making rules of the games so that violations such as failure to fulfill a contract can be mitigated. Discussing the economic uncertainties, let's discuss about California versus Texas in the ranking of United States. The land area and exports are twice of California if we compare it with Texas. However, the population and GDP of California is just half. Today, approximately 100,000 people leave California every year and they move to Texas. The reason is Texas is attracting so many people every year because the cost to rent a self-drive small moving truck for household goods for one-way journey from Los Angeles to Austin is 3 times more than the other way around. There are more people which are moving from California to Texas. Are defined as the rules of the game. They are mainly categorized into formal and informal components. They have their own respective supporting pillars. The key functions is to reduce the uncertainty, curtail the transaction cost, and combat opportunism. The institutional framework is mainly divided into 3 pillars: regulatory, normative, and cognitive pillars. Formal institutions includes laws, regulations, and rules. Their primary supportive pillar is the regulative pillar. It is corrective powers of the government. On the other hand, the informal institutions includes norms, cultures, and ethics. The two main pillars are normative and cognitive. The normative pillar refers to how the value, beliefs, and actions of other relevant players, collectively known as norms, influence the behavior of a focal individual and firms. Supporting informal institutions, the cognitive pillar refers to the internationalized, taken for granted values and beliefs that guide behavior. The transitions in the institutions are widespread in the world. Institution transitions in some emerging economies like China, Poland, Russia, Vietnam, are so persuasive that these countries are simply called transition economies. If we discuss an example, like in Brazil, the cost of doing business is sky high, which reaches to 35% of the GDP, which is much higher than Mexico and China. In Mexico, it is 18%, and in China, it's 16%. Democracy is a political system in which citizens elect representatives to govern the country. On the contrary, totalitarianism is a political system in which one person or party exercises absolute political control. It is more of a practice in which government or political systems prohibits opposition parties, restricts individual oppositions to the state and its claim, and exercises an extremely high degree of control over the public and private life. Civic law uses comprehensive statutes and codes as a primary means to form legal judgments. Common law is shaped by precedents and traditions from previous judicial decisions, and theoretical law is a legal system based on religious teachings. Now, coming to property and intellectual property rights. Property rights are the legal rights to use an economic resource and to derive income and other benefits from it. Intellectual property refers to intangible property that is the result of intellectual activity. There are three kinds of economy diversification: market economy, command economy, and mixed economy. A pure market economy is characterized by laissez faire and the total control by market forces. A pure command economy is defined by government ownership and control of all means of production. Most countries operate mixed economies with a different emphasis on market versus command forces. The most important forces affecting global business nowadays, formal institutions such as political, legal, and economic systems, provoke some significant debates. Now we will talk about two major debates. First one is drivers of economic development, and the second one is private owned versus state owned. The objective of the firm in private ownership is to maximize the profit for private owners who are capitalists, and in this, the entry is determined by the entrepreneurs, owners, and investors. Financing is from private sources. In private owned firms, the exit is forced by competition. A firm which has to declare bankruptcy or be acquired if it becomes financially insolvent. In state ownership, entry is determined by government officials and bureaucrats. The financing is from state sources such as direct subsidiaries or banks, which are owned or controlled by government. The exit is determined by government officials or bureaucrats. Firms deemed too big to fail may be supported by taxpayer dollars indefinitely. Now, coming to moral hazard, it is recklessness when people and organizations, including the firms and governments, do not have to face the full consequences of their actions. Thank you. Now I would like to request my colleague to take over from the next slide.
Hello, my name is Dulki and I will be explaining the summary of the case number 2, the future of Cuba. Cuba is famously known for the beautiful beaches of Havana, cigars, rum, and of course Cuban coffee. But the background of its economy lies a dark, twisted tale of political instability and a failing, inefficient economic model of communism. Cuba's main economic model is communism. Karl Marx stated famously in 1848 in his book known as the Communist Manifesto that communism means there is no private ownership of economic resources, as all the resources are publicly owned and controlled by the state, which means there was no way for private firms to set up their businesses in Cuba. It also meant that there was no foreign direct investment allowed. Cuba also had an embargo, which means that countries like USA were not allowed to export their goods to Cuba. Production in Cuba is only intended to meet all basic human needs, and the government provides most or all of the food, clothing, and other necessities. It also means that the government has to ration and manage food supply. There are many reasons that countries such as Cuba have adopted the economic model of communism. The Great Depression, 1929 to 1933, was seen as a failure of capitalism and led to the favorism of the Soviet style state ownership, leading to its rise in countries such as Cuba. The reasons for this are that life expectancy was seen on par with United States at 79 years. Social benefits are covered, and the government provides free healthcare and world-class education inclusive of free pension, allowing the development of skilled doctors and professionals. There are many economic inefficiencies that resulted due to the communist economic model, such as food shortages, lower average monthly wages, and unproductivity coupled with compromised quality and low pay. The Soviet Union's push to industrialize at any cost resulted in frequent shortages of food and consumer goods. Average monthly wages are very low and is seen in this diagram, which shows that the wage rates have been lowering over the years. It has also resulted in unproductivity and compromised quality in manufacturing and services. It got to a point where the government factories in Cuba had employees stealing food from the factories, and the justification from employees were that all these factories and firms were owned by the state and therefore served the public, and that they were allowed to steal from the government factories. The lack of competition and no privatization meant that employees had zero or no motivation to improve quality, had no motivation to work harder, which meant that it lowered the levels of production of sugar in Cuba. While Cuba may be famously known for sugar and cigars, their production levels dropped over the years, and this may be the reason. This case predominantly speaks of the revolution of the Castro brothers, and this played a huge part in the governance of Cuba. The Castro family was a huge part in the Communist Party. Fidel Castro, previous president, organized a Cuban Communist Party in 1965. Although communist activity began in 1923, the Castro family upheld this economic model in Cuba. Raul Castro, the younger brother who then succeeded Fidel Castro to become Cuba's president in 2008, brought around a transitioning phase for Cuba, where he allowed foreign direct investment tourism and the acceptance of the use of US dollar as tender. He also created an alliance with Venezuela to send doctors and professionals in exchange for cheap oil. He allowed experimenting on a limited scale for small shops to open up, such as beauty parlors and restaurants, but opportunities were extremely limited. Even though Raul Castro brought about significant changes, they were still small changes because he was a part of the Castro family that had decades of involvement in communism, and communism did not allow the privatization of the state. Thereby, his changes may be significant but were extremely limited. He was also in talks with Barack Obama to set up an alliance with USA and reduce the embargo on the ban of imports.
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Busari Babatunde. I'll be talking about the case question. I'll answer question one, two, and three. But before I jump into the case answers, I'll try to talk about Cuba a little bit. We can see Cuba is the only communist totalitarian in the Western Meridian. It has had great achievements in social work such as health and education, social benefit that has covered everyone by providing healthcare, education, as well as pension payments. On the other hand, to think about it, there has been an economic stagnation, poor income, and food shortage due to command economy system. When we talk about command economy system, what do you think command economy system is? Command economy system is, according to chapter 2, command economy system is all when all production are owned by governors or state owners. Also, all prices are planned by the government. Like any production is done by the government, prices are also determined by the government. This particular system, this command economy, this system changed to mixed economy when Raul Castro took over the presidency and transferred a considerable amount of state-owned enterprise to be private-owned. This means there was a capitalist system of there was capitalist system. Now, now to question one. Question one said that why has state ownership of farmer resulted in disaster in Cuban farming? I would say that this state ownership of farm has led to huge drop in farm produce in Cuba. Its agricultural, its traditional agricultural past has deteriorated as 45% of 75% Arabia land owned by the state lay idle. Even even with the president letting private owners and corporates lease the idle land, the farmers in Cuba, the farmer has the farmer has a difficult time making a living from the farms. This is only because the farmer have no motivation to work harder due to the state-owned monopoly suppliers of farm tools and the monopoly purchaser of farm produce like of farm produce. Thank you. Now to question two. Question two said that on ethics, what are the norms governing employee behavior in Cuban state-owned enterprise? Are these norms right or wrong? First of all, state-owned enterprise are known for their poor quality of services and goods, as well as low pay to their workers. So Those workers working for state-owned enterprise, they created a norm of stealing supplies from their workplace and sell it because they believe that what belongs to the state also belongs to the people. In this case, they felt so free to take what they want as it belongs to them. I can proudly say that it is a wrong norm as it creates a bad example for other people. And they use this excuse to justify stealing, embezzlement, and they took it for granted, which is very, 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 very bad. Thank you. Now to question three. In the economic system, the economic prediction that whatever the intention of Cuba communist leader, they will find it impossible to prevent the island from moving to some form of capitalism. Is a true prediction because as much as there is a little change with government allowing operation of small business and home business to operate, it is still a move towards capitalism. And with Cuba and United States government separately declaring interest in restoring commercial relation, it is quite certain that Cuban leaders will soon embrace capitalism. The future of Cuba appear quite promising with the United States and Cuban government looking to restore their diplomatic and commercial relation. Um, Normalization of US-Cuba relation will ensure a relief in economic hardship experienced in Cuba with moves towards capitalism. There is an international trade and investment. With increasing trade, farming is sure to increase as there will be more supplies of tools as well as more purchases of farm produce. Thank you.
Um, we're answering the fourth question, which is should foreign firms be interested in entering Cuba? And as we could see from the case, foreign firms, majority of them found it difficult and had no reason of entering Cuba because some of the investors had made losses while others has made lucrative profit. And however, a large share of the profit goes to the Cuban government. Other reasoning, other reasons also included a harsh climate for doing business. For example, the government controls the factors of production. So the purchasing power of the individuals in Cuban was quite low, and it was not favorable also for doing business, and it's also not good for small enterprises to survive. So if you look at the slide, you could see the per capita for different countries like Cuba, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Haiti. And from 1945 to 2010, this is a time period that we were looking at that, and we could see that the per capita for uh, Haiti was kind of rising steadily. If it was rising steadily as compared to Cuba, which have steady, which was not steady, was kind of moving up and down, and it dipped at a point, and it rose at a point, so making the livelihood of the people very difficult, and they were not making enough money for themselves. Last but not the least question, as US sanctions are gradually lifted, what will happen to Cuba politics and economy? So the reality is that the Cuban products are already widely available in Europe and other part of the world, and when the United States become a more active trading partner with Cuba, it's likely that some European multinational corporations that distribute Cuban products to the rest of the world will control the distribution of those products in the United States as well. So US is the biggest is a giant when it comes to the world trading. So one is going to help in terms of help to the economy. Is going to help boost their GDP. Going to in terms of GDP, it's going to help the per capita of the economy. It's going to is going to strengthen their local industries, the private sector. It's going to help help them in terms of increase their demand and then supply. Is going is really going to help the economy because now they are going to export more to the United States, and it's going to bring them enough foreign inflow, which will in turn reduce the inflation rate in their country because the more they export to the United States, they receive more foreign income. Is going to help them stabilize the economy, which at a point was kind of dwindling down, and people didn't want to do business with them. So now it's going to help strengthen the economy, and it's going to also help build more factories to be built, more industries, which is going to make the Cuban economy a very robust economy in the world.